this lecture will then be posted to our Schoology page, so you can always go back and check out the things we have learned. All right, so today, focusing on hieroglyphics. We ended yesterday talking about some of the plants and farming along the Nile, which of course we had papyrus. And that papyrus is going to be turned into paper, as we saw. Those reeds would be weaved together, hammered down a little bit, and then ink applied to create amazing writing. Now, just like in Mesopotamia, we have scribes being the record keepers, the writers. Most people could not write. It was very unique and special to be able to write. You had to go to special school, and you typically had to be some of the wealthy elite. Unfortunately, too, only boys were allowed to be scribes in Egypt, and they are the only ones that are going to be attending scribe school. Sorry, ladies. And just like for us, when you guys go to kindergarten around age 5, schooling is going to start around age 5 for the Egyptians as well. They realize they got to get them young to get them to learn all of that good stuff. And also, much like us, they spent about 12 years learning these hieroglyphics. So just like how you go all the way to 12th grade, so we spend 13 years because you have kindergarten, then 1st through 12th. These guys spent 12 or more years having to learn all of these hieroglyphics. And we're going to see why, because there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of these things. And plus they'll learn other things besides just how to write. We talked about this, how the papyrus was woven to make the paper. And much like how our Sumerians used a stylus and they would go dip that into the clay to go, the people of Egypt would go and just dip it in ink and use ink instead. They thought paper was way better. So, Egyptian writing, you had to be a scribe, you had to be a boy. It took you 12 or more years, and you used papyrus. Here we see the papyrus plants. Here we see the stylus, a little different than the stylus that the Sumerians used. It's longer, finer, makes kind of sense with it. Then here's the finished product. Once we're in class together, you'll be able to go and see the papyrus I have hanging up in my classroom. All right, so these hieroglyphics. Now, this would typically what we do on this day is we'd actually write things in hieroglyphics, but it's kind of hard to do that on the computer. When I was in 8th grade, our teacher made us do all of our, we called them warm-ups, we call them do-nows, made us write the questions and the answers in a notebook in hieroglyphics when we were in Egypt. It took so long, but it was really cool. At the end, I was actually really good at writing in hieroglyphics. Now, English has 26 characters or letters, all right? Ancient Egyptian, 2,000. So, almost, it's not 1,000 times, but it's like 950 times the amount of characters that people have to learn. 2,000. Imagine if your ABCs were 2,000 long. Wouldn't that be crazy? And, so we use our letters phonetically, meaning we take the sounds to go do it, whereas a lot of the Egyptian hieroglyphics were pictograms. And it's basically a picture to represent an object. All right. So, for example, if, Jackie wants to go write a card to a boy saying, "You are my sunshine," she would draw a sun shining, and that's what it would be. Now, here's what makes it really, really tricky. Not only are hieroglyphics pictograms, meaning a picture to represent something, they're also ideograms, meaning it can mean an idea. No, not something you call your siblings. Cortez, do not call Tati an ideogram. That just means she'd be a picture that represents an idea. So don't even think about it, bro. Ideograms, pictures, ideas. So, for example, when Jackie is drawing that thing and saying, "You are my sunshine," the sun would be an item, but even the warmth or light could be represented by the sun. And here's where, like I said, it gets real tricky. English, it's all phonograms. It could also be a phonogram for hieroglyphics. And here we have an example of a hieroglyphic alphabet where, the th sound, the th, are this like rope shape. Y is these 2 feathers. And it's one of those things where it's kind of cool how they have representations for sounds that we don't. Like we have a t kind of sound, but if we want th, We put a T and an H together, whereas they just had a symbol just for that. So we have 2,000 hieroglyphic characters. Those 2,000 things could represent an object, could represent an idea, it could represent a sound. So really, it's 6,000 things you have to know. Isn't that complicated? Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So, quick question for you to see if anyone can figure out, what did I just write there? Who thinks that they can tell me what I have written in hieroglyphics on the top here with the orange? So give me a me in the chat or raise your hand. Who thinks they can read the hieroglyphics here? All right, Zoe thinks she knows. Miss West?
Do we say the word or do we just spell it out?
Yeah, what's the word?
The word is water.
Do you agree, Evelyn? Yes, she is correct, water. We've got our W right here, our A right here, our T, our E, and then our R. Okay. We see we're going to find different variations of this as well. So through the different times, we're going to have different, different symbols for it. One of the really cool things is the cartouche. This is a cartouche. This is something that we figured out with the Egyptians. Whenever they did a name, they wouldn't just spell it out in hieroglyphics. They would go and put this like cylinder or oval cylinder kind of around it. And then that's how you know they're always talking about a name. So if you see a cartouche, you know they're talking about a person. Now, Egypt has 3 kingdoms. We haven't really gotten into the political history yet, but we're going to see that hieroglyphics are going to change over time. The Old Kingdom, starting, in 2500 BC, going to around 2000 BC, they have used a lot more hieroglyphs than they will in the New Kingdom, which is going to happen, in the 18 to 1600 BC. So what we're going to see is they're going to wind up narrowing it down to about 700 common hieroglyphs, and then we had some phonograms. So they're going to simplify it over time. But what happens is people start thinking hieroglyphics is too complicated. And so what happened was the priests would still use their hieroglyphs, but the regular people started learning how to write, and they started using something called demonic, which means popular script, meaning popular writing. So if Maddox was going to write a letter to his grandma, he would go write it in demonic because his grandma would not read hieroglyphics. And what happens over time is people forgot how to read hieroglyphics. The Egyptians themselves stopped knowing how to do it because it was first the priests, but eventually they're going to stop worshiping those Egyptian gods. They're going to, be introduced to things like Judaism, introduced to things, like Christianity eventually too. They're going to be introduced to the Greek pantheon of gods. And as people stop worshiping the Egyptian gods as much, the priests stop using hieroglyphics, and demonic becomes the only script for the Egyptians. So when we wound up getting close to modern times, we had this problem where we would see these amazing hieroglyphs on the wall and no one knew how to read them, what they meant, what it could possibly be. Lucky for us, there was a discovery. So there's this stone called the Rosetta Stone. And people didn't pay much attention to it at first. In fact, did you guys get to talk about Napoleon and his wars with England and the rest of Europe? Did any of you guys get to talk about that stuff? I know your history is kind of interrupted by a lot of things, but did you guys get to Napoleon? Could someone say something in the chat and talk about that? So I just need to know how much I need to back up for our story. You don't think so, Evelyn? Well, Evelyn would know. All right. So there was a man who wound up ruling France for a period called Napoleon. You might have heard of him. Everyone joked that he was really short, but it's because the actual measurements were like different. So he actually was an average height person. But he was really, really good at war. He wound up taking over France and conquering a lot of Europe. And all of Europe went to war with Napoleon. And one day, Napoleon decided he was going to invade Egypt because he was at war with England and Egypt had lots of cool stuff. And he said, well, I want to have it. So he invades Egypt. So there was a period of time where the French ruled Egypt. And the Egyptians, of course, they didn't like it, nor did the British who were ruling Egypt before. So the English attack Egypt. And the French soldiers, Napoleon basically goes, well, I have to go do some warring over there. So I promise I come back. I totally will not abandon you to battle the English all by yourselves. P.S. He does totally abandon them, and they wind up losing England because he never, or losing Egypt because he never comes back. But his soldiers are stuck in France, and the British are attacking. So they start going and building forts everywhere. And they would just find random piles of stones. And some soldiers are going, building a fort, finding stones. And they find this one stone that has funny writing on it. And they start going and using it to build. And the captain says, you know what? That looks important with all that writing. Put that to the side. And what happened was they just discovered something amazing. You see, this stone had the same thing written in 3 different languages. It was written in Greek, it was written in Demotic, and it was written in hieroglyphics. All right? And what it actually says isn't too important. Basically, it was from Ptolemy V, who was one of the Greek rulers of Egypt. And basically it said, my name is Ptolemy V. You should totally go and listen to me. I'm the rightful ruler. The gods want me to rule. And what happened is this thing was lost to time. And eventually, when the British go defeat the French, they find this stone that the French did not use to get it, absorb cannonballs. And they go and take it back to England with them, where they study it. And someone's like, well, I could read the Greek. It says, I'm a guy named Ptolemy V, and you should listen to me. The gods want me to be your ruler. And they saw the Demotic, which they couldn't read. They saw the hieroglyphics, which they couldn't read. So they start going and asking around to if any Egyptians still spoke Demotic, because almost all the Egyptians started speaking Greek. And actually, by then, the Egyptians were mostly speaking Arabic as well. So they wound up going and finding a priest who still knew Demotic. And he goes and translate it. And then what happens is it says, I am Ptolemy V. I am the rightful ruler. The gods totally want me to rule. And he's like, wait a minute. That's what it says in Greek. And so from using the Demotic, using the Greek, they were able to figure out how to read hieroglyphics, which is awesome. And this was in England for a long time. It was also in France for a little while, but by 2003, it was finally brought back to Egypt, which makes sense because it's, Egyptian and it's about hieroglyphics. So that's how we can read hieroglyphics today because of our Rosetta Stone. Here we see people checking out the Rosetta Stone. Look how stinking big it is. It's awesome. Part of the Rosetta Stone is broken, which is unfortunate. We don't have the final. This is what we believe it looked like. And here is another example of the stone itself. Isn't that cool? All right. That is going to be our notes for the day. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. I'm going to stop the